I do remember the last time I saw him. That was in December, and it was a Friday night, and I was actually at a party with him, and everything totally seemed okay. You know, he seemed fairly happy. We were all hanging out, and I remember me and my friend Tyler De La Fuente being there, and it was a little past midnight, and he told us he wanted to go home. And so I didn't think anything of it at the time, and so I was like, all right, man, I'll see you later. And I remember watching him leave. It was the last time I ever saw him. My friend Tyler didn't really think it would have been smart for him to go driving, so he tried to go talk him out of it, but I mean, he drove away.
She said she, struggled with depression, at 14 years old. She was fighting depression. She just didn't feel like life was worth living anymore. She didn't feel important, like anybody cared about her. She was being teased. So she thought about it, and one night she decided to overdose on pills. So she locked herself in, I'm not sure, her bathroom or her bedroom and overdosed. Her mom found her, passed out, unconscious, took her to the hospital, had her stomach pumped and everything, and she ended up being okay. She was on suicide watch for a little bit. This was all really hidden. My school did not tell us anything about this. So, I had no idea that this happened.
I was 16. I was a sophomore in high school. I had just finished my sophomore year. I've always wondered if I had depression, but I never had it clarified. And I was the same person I am, well, not the same person, but a very similar person to the person I am today. Happy, outgoing, a leader on my high school campus. And I had secrets that not everybody knew.
And then we got a text from Anthony Pingle. And I was with my original friends that I decided it was Lawson Enslin, Travis Stansforth, Ryan Valdez, Addison Ives, and Tyler De La Fuente. And we were all hanging out together. And I still remember we were watching Lawson play this UFC Xbox game that he had. And I just remember getting that text from Anthony that said, he wasn't really trying to be specific, whatnot, and he said, you can read your email for more, but one of our brothers is dead. And we thought they were playing a joke on us, and we thought it was kind of messed up.
My senior year of high school, I was riding in a car with my best friend. We've been best friends since 8th grade. And we were going to like a basketball game or something like that, and she stopped the car. We were at a stop sign, and she said, I have something to tell you. And I was like, okay, tell me, didn't think anything of it. And she said, I'm gonna give a chapel at school, because we went to a private school, so we had chapel twice a week. And I was like, oh, okay, what are you gonna talk about? And she said, I don't know if I wanna tell you, I just want you to hear during chapel. And of course, I kind of prodded her and made her tell, and eventually she just looked at me. I remember it clear as day. We were stopped at the stop sign about 2 blocks away from her house, and she looked at me and said, in the 8th grade, I tried to commit suicide, and she kind of, told me the story, and of course, we just sat there, parked for half hour, just crying. As she told me, she'd never told me this. I had no idea.
One summer, it was the summer after my sophomore year, I'd gone on a church trip and I'd found God, and then all of a sudden I just had this huge falling out again where it was hard. I don't know exactly how to describe it, but I just became angry and depressed and upset, and everyone else thought I was perfectly fine. Well, one day in July, I had it all planned out. I was going to have medication. I had chronic back pain, so I figured I would find some of that and see what we have in our medicine cabinet. I'm sure there was enough there to do the trick. And I was going to take my own life, and I had it all ready. I had pill bottles sitting out, and for some reason, I had a leadership camp coming up the next week. And I was like, well, I leave in 3 days, and I can just, something told me, wait for the leadership camp. So I decided to wait.
I just remember them telling us that Evan was dead. No one was really telling us how. We didn't know. Until we went to the house and they told us then that he'd committed suicide. Everything changed after that, for me, for my friends. Me personally, the first time in my life, a friend was dead. And I've had friends that had died before, but it had been from, they got in an accident, or actually that's about it, or they got hurt, skiing. That has happened to me, and it sucks. I'm not the biggest fan of death, obviously, but this was the first time that I ever had a friend take his own life. And I didn't let it be known at the time. I mean, I think suicide is so selfish. Beyond reasonable doubt. There's no doubt in the world, nothing that's going to change my view on the fact that I think it's selfish. That it's a selfish way to go, because you leave so many people here, back on Earth, with so many unanswered questions, with so many different emotions at a time when I don't think it's necessary. He had plenty of people he could have talked to.
She said that about a month after this happened, we happened to sit next to each other one day in class. Somebody stole my seat, and I had to sit next to her, and we had to do a group discussion, and I just ended up talking to her. And from that day, we started talking in between classes, and then talking more, and by the end of the month, we were best friends. We were inseparable. And that day in the car, she told me that I saved her life because she was still contemplating suicide. She wasn't done with it. She still hated her life, hated everything about it. She said that day, when we became friends, that she realized that life was worth living and that there were people out there that meant something to her. So that meant, of course I cried and I cried. I could not believe that my best friend, who, was one of the most strong people I know, especially now, she's one of the strongest people I know, that she could be that vulnerable, and that, it could happen to her. I couldn't even imagine, sitting there and looking back now, what my life would be without her. She's been my rock ever since the 8th grade. All we've been through, I sat there in that car and I just thought about what that meant to me. That, she had to go through that, and that nobody helped her. That was the first thing, was that nobody knew about this. That she, felt that she wasn't worth it. And then the fact that she told me that I saved her life because I tried. I wasn't talking to her out of pity. Because I didn't know that she tried to commit suicide and she almost died. I didn't know that. I was just, being nice, and it ended up, saving her life. And from that day, my senior in high school, my life has never been the same. I can't even, go a week without thinking about that, without thinking of what my life would be without her, how my life would have been impacted. It completely changed the way I live, how the way I treat people, because you never know. That's one of the hardest things I think about depression and suicide and anxiety, is that a lot of times, people put on such a good face. They're so good at convincing other people that they're okay, when in reality they're not. They're not okay. And, she put on a pretty good face in the 8th grade. You know, a lot of people didn't know about this. She was kind of a loner, you know, pretty quiet, but she kept to herself. But she put on a good face. I had no idea.
That being said, he was obviously emotionally hurt and at the time thought that it was his only way out, which, you know, looking back, it's really hard to say what could we have done, because I mean, he was drinking. So would he have done it if he was sober? I mean, we have no way to know. There's just, it's weird to think about sometimes, and it really hurts. And that was no longer a story in a newspaper or on television to me. This was real life. This happened to my friend. I'll probably never have the same outlook on life again. I definitely cherish it much more now. I get much more emotional when I hear something about any type of suicide. It's not a laughing matter. It's not any type of matter. It's not a matter that anyone should even joke about or think about or threaten. None of those. It's god-awful. A lot changed with my friends, too. You know, as to the extent as there was I had 2 of my friends that were dating at the time who were really both good friends with Evan, and it ruined their relationship in the end. You know, I have friends that still aren't over it. I have, you know, some friends handled it in different ways. You know, some of my friends went out and got so messed up you wouldn't even believe it. They did different drugs, they drank a ton. They didn't know how to cope with it. I had friends that decided to never go out again, that didn't want to go be social anymore, that ended up being cooped up. I had friends that dropped their J-term class to stay at home with their parents. I almost thought about doing the same thing.
Well, I got there and it was a leadership camp called RILA, Rotary Youth Leadership Award. And it's a bunch of teenagers that were a lot like myself, excited about life. Well, most people thought I was excited about life. And little did they know that I was there just putting on this fake smile. On our way up there was in Estes Park, Colorado, which is an hour away from my house. We were driving up and my dad and I got in a huge fight, and I was like, if this is how the rest of the week is going to go, then sayonara. Like, I was done. And I didn't even tell him goodbye, I love you. I was so upset. And I got up there and we were put into teams, and my team had a bunch of different people. Like, we were all different walks of life, and they were all nice, and we got to know each other a little bit, and we were thrown into this bonding, and it was awkward and weird. And we had these people called JCs, and they were junior counselors. Most of them were college-age kids that had also been to RILA in previous years, and they would do words of wisdom, where they would get up and tell their story about what makes them a good leader and how they're normal people just like us. And I never realized how similar I was when one JC got up there, and his name was Brett, and he got up and he said, when I was a sophomore in high school, I had a gun up to my head, and a friend called and asked me to go to this church camp with him. And I said, fine, I'll wait until the end of church camp and then I'll come back and do it. And he told the story, and I just broke into tears. I just met all these people and I'm sobbing, and no one really knew what was going on with me, but Brett was telling my story just in his own words. But we had identical stories where we were both, it was this camp for me where I was planning on killing myself after the camp. And he said on his last day at this church camp, they were saying what else they could have been doing rather than being there. And everyone was like, I could be doing all this homework. And he said, I could be dead. And it just sent chills down my spine. And I realized, what was I thinking? Like, here's this guy, and now he's so happy, and he's just like me. And we were broken up into different groups that were supposed to they were cause groups. So there were 3 different choices. There were a bunch of choices, but you were supposed to choose 3, and then they would take random people and put them in these cause groups together. And I had put down depression, suicide, and parent-teacher relationships. And somehow I was put in the suicide group. And I went, and it was right after Brett had just finished talking, and I was broken into this group, and there's all these new strangers that I hadn't met, and they were all sitting there saying how they had just lost a friend that week to suicide. A bunch of them didn't even know each other, but they all knew this kid in Denver who had just completed suicide. And I looked at them and I said, Brett just told my story. This was my church camp. And they hugged me and we cried and cried. And then I told my team, and that's the week I made some of my best friends, because no one knew until that week. My parents, I called them sobbing because I was ready to tell them that I think I have depression, and my life was just saved because of one summer camp. And I called them, and my mom thought I was in trouble or something, just because she couldn't understand a word that came out. And I went back home and I saw them, and I told them everything after the camp was done. And that's when I decided life is worth living. And I always had that attitude, life is great, but inside I never believed it.
None of my friends were the same. From what I experienced that first semester compared to the second semester, and then even compared to the next year, and even to now. None of my friends are the same because of it.
It took a few months before I decided to go on to antidepressants and start seeing someone. And there's been 3 different times where the antidepressants haven't been working, and now I know I'm on them for the rest of my life. And that's hard to know because there's a lot of stigma around depression, but it's better to be on these pills than take my own life. And I'm not saying without the pills I would do it, but I'd like to help others realize that maybe one little event can be your RILA or your church camp, and I don't know.
And I remember we all had our frat shirts on, we were chilling in the house, and never seen so many men cry in one room. And then we walked over to the chapel because they had that service that night, and I remember walking in there and they had that whole front row reserved for us, front 2 rows. And I just remember walking in with that shirt on, the Psi Theta shirt. Everyone knew that I wouldn't say everyone, but most people knew he was in YOE, and I just remember the place just getting dead silent when we were walking in, and everyone was just staring at us walking down the aisle, and it was really surreal. I wasn't exactly sure what was happening. I mean, I was 19 years old. Granted, this wasn't my first year in college, and yeah, I've had family members die and everything, but they were old, So at this point, it was getting really surreal for me. The fact that this guy that I considered myself really good friends with, that I just got to know, who I considered part of my family, was now gone. And what made it harder was to see all of these guys that I was really good friends with who were a couple years older than me, who were just in complete shock and tears, and it's not something I ever want to go through again. Suicide
has impacted other people's lives, with Evan. I didn't know Evan. I was a freshman. I wasn't on campus that long, and I remember the day when I got the email, and I sat there and thought about it, and I thought about, my connection to my friend and what his friends had to be going through, because I knew I was, my life was changed, and her, suicide wasn't even successful, and I just thought about her, his friends and what they had to be going through, and how his suicide impacted not only his family and Chase or his friends, but it impacted the community. Campus was completely changed.
I really wish he was still here, though. I'd give anything I could to get him here still. And I just wish people really understood how suicide can affect you, and how it can mess with you, and how it can be such a game changer in so many people's lives.
Why I got involved in Active Minds is because it's so important to me that nobody has to go through that. I just want, especially campus, to be aware of the prevalence of suicide and depression. It's so out there, especially in college-age students, and because we're going through so many things in life, leaving your parents, moving out, living in a dorm, worrying about money and school. There's so many stressors in life, and I think, it can affect anybody, and it's scary. Suicide is so scary. It's so scary to think about that somebody could be in that dark of a place. And I think, it's so hard to believe that somebody would want to do that. But I know it's all over campus, and I've kind of, this is why I wanted to do, this, is because, and I talked to her about it, I wanted to do this, we both wanted to do this, because she wanted her story to be known, because she doesn't want anybody to have to go through that, and I don't want anybody to have to go through that. And I think, I'm thankful every day. I'm so blessed that she's still here, because she, like I said, has changed my life. Her story has changed my life, and I want it to impact other people also.
If someone's weighing on your mind, just call them and check in on them, because it could save their life like it saved mine. So, yeah.